All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going through a series of videos where I have rebuilt the St. Louis Blues Line website using Bootstrap. And again, this is the site for what it's worth right there. And what I've started to do now, and this is about the fourth lecture in this series, is to go over the changes that I made. So previously, I talked a little bit about Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4 and where to get some information on it. Then I mentioned some of the global changes that I made, and in the last lecture I went through and talked about the nav bar. So in this particular set of lectures, I'd like to go through everything that you see here, which is what I call the cover. This is the home page. So notice that I gave it a div of my cover. Why did I do this? Notice here there's a div with an ID of my cover. There's a div with an ID of my carousel, a div with an ID of my about, and a div with an ID of my sign up. Those particular things were set up so that we would have, basically what I was doing was creating page jumps. I wanted to make sure that when I was on the site here and I was at the bottom and I wanted to click home, that was going to my home. All right. This was going to my photos. This was going to my about. This was going to my contact, etc. Just so you're aware, that's why I did what I did there. All right. Everything I tried to make it as much HTML5-ish as I could, so it's inside of a section. So this section is called cover. Why? Don't know. All right. This is if I wanted any kind of caption. So you'll notice it's very interesting, and I may have mentioned this in an earlier lecture, that in times gone by, there were, one thing about writing HTML CSS code is you had a lot of divs. All right. But the one thing about divs is divs are not very semantic. In other words, I could have made this div and I didn't even have to give it an ID. Or I could have given it an ID that was just called X. I don't know why I do that, but I could. So by themselves, unless you give divs a really good name that explains what it is you're doing, divs themselves do not do a good job of being very self-descriptive. Well, the idea with HTML5 and it being a semantic language is that the stuff that's in there is descriptive, so you know what a section is. All right? One thing that you typically will do when you work with Bootstrap is everything you create is inside of a container class, whether it's a table, whether it's something else. Also, Bootstrap uses a grid system, and the grid system that it uses is based on 12 columns. By and large, everything you do is equal to 12, unless, as I've done here, you use an offset. When you use an offset, you don't have to make it 12, but by and large, when you're doing this, it's going to be size 12, or it's going to be a bunch of things that equal 12. Now, the site, just so you're aware of this, I'm going to jump down to the bottom of my CSS, and you'll notice that in the bottom of the CSS, where is it? And I know it's in here. All right, well, I thought I put media queries in here, and I guess that I didn't. The site itself is not perfectly responsive. What do I mean? Well, notice this isn't bad when you look at it right here. All right, it doesn't look too bad. All right, that doesn't look very good, so that's not very responsive. That doesn't look too bad. Again, these aren't very, they should have been, the size should have been changed. There's my slideshow. That doesn't look too bad. All right, this does not look good. Now, when I hit a certain point, which I think is about 768, it gets better. All right, you see that? That all looks, well, that doesn't look very good. But when I hit a certain point, boom, it jumps into place. That's probably 768 right there. So I really should have done a better job than I did of using media queries. All right, if I have time, I'll go back and add those. All right. Other than that, what's in here, well, this is just raw, for lack of better words, HTML. Here's my H1 tag. I've got a couple paragraphs. Boom. That's it. Also, inside of here, inside of this cover page, I put in this, which is that very, very simple form that you see in here. Let me check my time. Okay. This very simple form, this that you see right here in gray is this right here. Okay? And again, it's very simplistic. I gave it an ID of subscribe form. All right? I didn't have it go anywhere. I made it a Bootstrap inline form. If you don't know what an inline form is, the idea, again, is watch what happens when it gets to be a certain size. You see how it goes on to more than one line? But when it tries to keep it all on one line. That's the inlineness of an inline form. Everything that you work on basically inside of a form is part of class form group. And the individual controls are form controls. All right. And I made them large to try to make them a little bigger than normal. There was the placeholder. The button, I made it a success button, and I made it large, the one that says subscribe, so you may or may not be able to tell. That's a bigger button than normal. Okay. And also for that button that's a little bit bigger than normal, the other thing that I did with it here, okay, was I made it, like I said, I made it large, and I made it of type success. All right, which by default is, I believe, green, but I changed the color. So let's see, what did I do in here? Hopefully I did a pretty good job. Notice there's my nav bar stuff. So when I got down to the bottom of my nav bar, that's everything in my cover. So that's everything on the main page. So there was that URL that I used that I called blueline2.jpg. And if we look at that particular image, you'll see blueline2.jpg. Okay, it looks big there, but it's not. It's because I saved it as a bigger file using GIMP. And when I did, it got at least a little bit distorted. It was more this size when I first saved it. All right. All right, so I gave it a background. And when you say background size cover, that basically means that what I want it to do is to cover that entire page. All right, I made the background color white. I gave it a height of 100%. I said whatever text we put on in there, align it to the center. And I also tried to use a little bit of what's called CSS Flexbox, which is a way that you end up using less floats. If you're using true Flexbox, you don't have to use any floats to align things. I mentioned to you before, I'm not trying to push this guy on you, even though it might sound like it. But again, if I type in Brad Traversy CSS Flexbox, he also has a video on here that literally is 20 minutes long that's called Flexbox CSS in 20 minutes. All right. There's the URL, but again, all I did was I just Googled Brad Traversy CSS Flexbox. The idea is many developers do not like using floats. Floating left, floating right, then having to clear your floats, etc. And the idea with CSS Flexbox is you do little to none of that. If you want yet another resource for this, you can type in CSS-tricks Flexbox. It's not a real huge article, but it's called A Complete Guide to Flexbox, and it's by Chris Coyer, and it's from March of 2017. And it literally does talk to you about why you might want to use Flexbox. Let's see if you print it out. It is pretty big. Okay, but there's comments and stuff in here also. I know that. So that's probably a lot of that document. All right. So the image, I said to make sure it has a height and a width of 100%. My H1 tag, I changed the color and made it bold for the H1. For the P tag and for the label, notice that in here, for the H1 tag, I used M's, again, a relative size. And for the P tag and for the label, I used M's, again, a relative size. For that success button, I came in here and I changed the background color so it was the blues blue and the text color, all right, so that it was that orangish or yellow, whatever that is. And I said if we have any caption, make it take 100% of the width. I think I'm going to stop right here, and when I pick it up, I'll continue on by talking about the carousel.